And welcome to this week's edition of Conversations. I'm Jeff DeForrest. Couldn't be any more excited to have this topic to discuss because it's coming up on Saturday, first Saturday in May. My favorite degenerate wagering event of all time. I think the biggest, most golden opportunity you could probably be presented with if you're doing any form of gambling, which I know everybody is out there. They're all involved with some offshore website in Guam or whatever. But if you are going to bet, the Kentucky Derby is a golden opportunity. And I couldn't be any happier than to welcome to the show to help us do a little bit of a deep dive on this thing. Then our good friend, our dear friend, Caton Bredar, of course, you know her from FanDuel TV, but I will never forget this, Caton. And I had known you before this when you began in the publicity department at Calder Racecourse, which you were always a delightful person to deal with. And you could tell you had an unbelievable affinity and feel for the game. And we did reveal on a previous show that I don't know if you want to embrace this or not, that you are a horse whisperer, which is the kind of person I want to talk to about what's going to happen in the Derby. First of all, how are you, my friend?
Oh, you're revealing my secrets. Jeff, I'm great. I'm so excited because it's Derby time. This is like the time that everybody comes and focuses on our sport. So it's tremendous. And this year, I think, though we always have some good stories, this year you have some great stories. It really is one of the best derbies I can think of as far as just, some horses that sentimentally you can latch onto. And if you can beat the favorite, I think, this is always the case. You can make some money.
Oh, no doubt. It actually has been fairly lucrative for me. I was talking about the Derby with Pete Aiello last week on the program, and he, like me, is far better served by the second race of $2,500 platers going
Yeah.
4.5 furlongs at Beulah Park than I am by any of the big races. But that whole thing changed with the maximum security disqualification many years ago. And you also, from a family standpoint, with your husband, Doug Bredar, who was at the time the agent for Florent Giroux, the rider of Mandaloon, did benefit, apparently. Did you ever get the money from that
We
DQ?
did. We did. In fact, it was just last year. We finally got the money. We never had the celebration that you normally typically do if you win the Derby, but it still goes down in the record books, and the check cleared. So that's all that matters.
No, I was, and of course that was Bob Baffert, and that's part of the storyline of the Derby. But the one thing that's consistent, and you see this, and you've been doing this throughout your lifetime, your adult lifetime, covering horse racing, probably involved in the game long before that. But just like every football player, you say, "Hey, what's your goal?" It's to win a Super Bowl. You talk to a baseball player, it's to win the World Series. And then when you talk to anybody in racing, it's not even necessarily just to win the Derby, which is a tremendous achievement, but it also anybody wants to just have a chance to participate, which is really one of the universals. There wouldn't be a single person you would talk to, from a groom who's mucking stalls this morning somewhere at River Downs to Baffert or Pletcher or any of the big trainers or owners that wouldn't say, my dream was to be a part of the Kentucky Derby.
It really is. It's amazing, and it's one of those that, I mean, people all over the world, when you stop to think, some of the richest people in the world, some of the most connected people in the world that get involved in the sport, this is what they want to do. And just because they're the richest people in the world and can buy the greatest horses, they still can't necessarily win it. But they keep trying and they keep trying. And then there's the people who have won it and they still keep coming back. That's what's, to me, most amazing and most intriguing. I actually just left the barn area and got to sit down with Bob Baffert and Wayne Lucas, and they both have horses in this race this year. And yet, Wayne is in his late 80s and has won as many derbies as anybody's going to win. Bob is right there too. And it's the same. It's the same way as it was when they were going for their first one. That first one just made them hungry to come back and do it again, because it's the ultimate. And it's one of those that if you're on an airplane and you sit next to somebody and say you're involved in horse racing, that's what they ask. Have you won the Kentucky Derby?
Or have you been to it, which is also spectacular as well. All right, so we're Tuesday of Derby week. You've already been out to the track. You've already been on the air with FanDuel TV. You were unfortunately having to go to a healthcare facility
Right.
for the husband's blood pressure, which
Little
skyrocketed.
minor
Yeah,
scare, and fortunately all is well. But just some lost sleep. It made it. I have to say, it cut down on the preparation time from getting out of bed and then getting ready to go to the track because you didn't go to bed. So you
yeah.
just got, you
Well,
just
and
went to the
I
track.
got a message from you at like 2:30 about the link for the show, and I'm thinking, why is Kate up? Oh yeah, of course she's out there for the morning workouts and
Right. Not quite
observing the
that
horse.
early most of the time.
All right, let's get into some details about the race here with Caton Bredar of FanDuel TV, and we're going to be joined shortly by Larry Collmus, the now voice, and has been for several years now of NBC's Triple Crown coverage. Guy does a great job, and he's one of your colleagues on FanDuel TV, an astute handicapper as well. All right, you mentioned the Baffert story. He of course had a 3-year suspension. The horses that he was developing. I mean, who's more better known for taking 2-year-olds, developing them into 3-year-olds, and that's his whole mission is to win Triple Crown races, which he's like accumulated, like it was Roger Federer accumulating majors in tennis.
Yep.
And he was such a charming character in the beginning. When he put the trophy over his head, no one will forget that. He was sort of aloof and a little bit of a goof by comparison to the normal standards, yes, ma'am, no, ma'am, Jack Webb School of Journalism that a lot of the trainers went to. And he was a delightful character. Did that image change? How much, if at all, was that tarnished by the controversy that surrounded him of having a horse disqualified for illegal drug use in a Kentucky Derby? And the other thing, I guess the second part of the question would be, was that the worst excuse ever that you've heard for somebody that got caught with drugs in their system, that the groom had peed on a pile of hay and somehow
Well,
the horse ate it, and it was him because he had a chocolate bar that was tainted? I mean, that was
this
as far
time,
as I heard.
this time it was a rash. They claimed that was some medicine used for the rash
Yeah.
to clear it up. But you know what's interesting about it is that I found this fascinating. The people who didn't like Bob in the first place don't like him even more now, and the people who liked Bob going into it are right back where they were now that he's back, and are happy that he's back. And you know, he is, for what it's worth, a little bit of a kinder, gentler, uh, even quieter Bob to a certain extent. He's not going to be trophy over his head anymore. The one thing I'd say, you know, penalties aside and excuses aside, he was treated differently in terms of the aftermath than anyone has ever been treated before or probably ever will be again. There definitely seemed to be a desire to make an example out of him and teach him a lesson. And I know that when he was looking at the possibility of never being able to come back to the Derby, that it did affect him greatly. And he is, again, a kinder, gentler Bob, I would say, as far as how he deals with the media, what he says. But he's still there and talks a lot and freely with how grateful he is to be back and to be a part of it and how much he missed it. And he has as big a media throng as he's ever had. That's still the biggest crowd that is out on the backstretch. They're surrounding his barn. So what's interesting is I don't think this year's the year for Bob. I'm sure he will win a Derby again, but I don't think he's going to do it this year.
All right. He has two in there, right?
Yep.
The one ball, who's like a bomberoo,
Yep.
and Rodriguez, who won the Wood Memorial and looked pretty good and stylish. Now, was Rodriguez not named for Rudy Rodriguez? Was it named for Alex Rodriguez? How is
You
Bob?
know, I haven't found out the background story on that, but the thing for both, and both horses are nice horses, by the way. I just am not convinced that 1.25 miles is ideal for Citizen Bull, and B, both these horses are speed horses, but you got a whole bunch of other speed horses in the race, and they drew toward the inside. Both Bob's horses did. So to me, it's an absolute mad scramble for the lead, and I don't see anybody being able to survive that. Neither of Bob's horses nor anybody else in the race that has to run in the lead. And I count at least 5 horses that are going to want to be on the lead or will be on the lead just because that's how they run. So that, at least now, I'm picking out of 15 instead of 20. But you even still have a horse on the also eligible that is she's trying to pull the Rich Strike, and he's a lot, to me, more accomplished and a better horse than Rich Strike ever was. That's Baeza.
Yeah.
If he makes it into the field, everything changes, and you won't know that until, I want to say, it's Friday morning is the latest a horse would scratch in to the Derby field, because I believe the wagering starts on all the bets that would combine Oaks Day and Derby Day, and they have early wagering on the Derby. So unless, obviously more horses could scratch, but I think the latest the also eligible can draw in is Friday morning.
Everybody likes it when there's a super horse, Caton, coming into the Derby, a horse that distinguished itself at 2 and looked to be somewhat invincible, and people are anticipating a Triple Crown, which you've had a couple of more recently after that a long 37-year gap.
Right.
But there doesn't appear to be that. I don't know if journalists is that in your opinion. I still hear, and I know you've done a zillion interviews, as have I, around horse racing, and I can't help. I'll probably get like a zero speed figure on this one, but I have to do the buyer impression, because I will never forget. I don't know if you have a few things that you retained over the years, like lines that stuck with you. I'll never forget Jacinto Vasquez telling me about his approach to life. You hang around with loosas, you'll be a loosa too. This was right before he was suspended for an endless number of years for various infractions and violations of the rules of racing. And I remember Andy Byer, I asked him about the field for the Derby. And this had to be circa 1980-something, mid-'80s. And he says, "This is the worst crop of 3-year-olds since Plug Nickel was a 3-5 favorite before the Kentucky Derby that year." Won by Genuine Risk, by the way, who actually was a pretty good horse. But how would you assess the entire crop here that we have going into the gate, the 20-horse field? Out of the 20, you just mentioned you might be eliminating the speed dual horses, but how many do you give a legitimate shot to, and how good is the quality of the field?
I actually think it's a pretty good field overall, because I think, I don't know that I would coordinate journalism, because I'm already trying to beat him.
Yeah.
But I think as far as talent goes, he's a really, really nice horse. I think he's every bit as good as some of the favorites that came in as those superstar monster horses. The only knock is that the fields are small in California, but he's done everything since his first start. He didn't win his first start, but he won his second, and then he went right to graded stakes, and he won at La Salle, and then he came back at San Felipe and Santa Anita Derby, and he kind of just toyed with the competition. In fairness, in Santa Anita Derby was his smallest margin. I just think he found trouble, but I do think he could find trouble in the Derby, which is why I'm playing against him to win. But he's a good horse. There are a couple others that I think are really good horses in here, and Burnham Square is as nice a horse as I think Ian has ever brought over, although he's developed gradually. It's not one of those superstars from the start. Bill Mott with Sovereignty, I think they've always believed he was a really good horse, and he won it too. So I think the quality is pretty solid here, but I think it's a feast or famine. I think I can come up, there are like 5 or 6 horses that I'm using for sure. And then I think that there are definitely 5 or 6 horses that I am throwing out completely, not giving any chance. And I'm throwing out the speed horses, not because they're not good horses, but because I think the race doesn't favor the way it's all going to come together and play out.
All right. You can't get enough opinions about these sort of things. So we welcome in another special guest of the program. And this gentleman also is a colleague of yours, Caton, at FanDuel TV, as we try to work him in here. Let's see. There he goes.
There he goes.
Oh,
Hi there.
And he
Hey
fits
there.
the screen perfectly with this dramatic weight loss that we've seen with the voice of the Triple Crown for NBC, great race caller, longtime Monmouth Park, Gulfstream Park, other places, now Del Mar. Just always does a tremendous job, and will be challenged with the task of calling 20 in the Kentucky Derby. We welcome from FanDuel TV as well, Larry Collmus, to the show. Larry, how are you? Thanks for joining us.
I'm good, Jeff. I'm doing great here in my hotel room in Louisville, getting ready to head out to the track and work for FanDuel TV later today. So it's been a fun week, and by the way, I just looked it up. Sixto Rodriguez apparently was a musician. That's who the horse is named after. And I also do an Andy Byer. As long as we have the right fake.
I was hoping you would join in that.
We can't have a Caton appearance on any show that we do without at least throwing some Andy Byer at her for some reason.
I spent many years growing up in Maryland in the press boxes there with him. So some interesting stories. One of my favorite, this is totally wacky, but I remember one day Clem Florio was the longtime handicapper for the Washington Post, and they were up in the press box, and Andy went up to Clem and says, "Clem, let me borrow 50." And so Clem gives him $50. Andy goes up to the betting window, goes, "Cecil, let me have 1,000 to win on the 6." And Clem's like, what did you want 50 for? He goes, "I didn't want to bet 950."
Yeah, I mean the stories were legendary. He happened to be wrong about that race, but it was always a pleasure running into this guy because he was so opinionated.
Legend, yeah.
As you need to be, Larry. Now the challenge, we'll get into that a little bit later on. The challenge of calling the races and what it means and how your approach is. But Caton is making a case against the speed in this race, which most handicappers are thinking, all right, they're going 1.25 miles for the first time. Weird Churchill surface that certain horses don't take to. I guess that's true of all tracks, but seems to be more prevalent at Churchill Downs, where a horse will just lay an egg inexplicably. What do you make of the race so far?
Well, I agree with Caton that the speed appears to be there. Like there's going to be a hot pace, and I think that is a disadvantage to the speed horses, including and especially Bob Baffert's duo. With the post they drew, I mean, what are they going to do? I mean, Citizen Bull from the rail, doesn't he have to go? Rodriguez, he's going to go. East Avenue, I think, could be in the race just to kind of help set it up for Sovereignty, who has the same owner. I mean, they're just, to me, appears to be a ton of pace in there, and it'll set up for late runners. And Caton knows this since his win at Gulfstream Park on December the 28th, I jumped right onto the Burnham Square bandwagon, and I have not jumped off of it. So I'm still with him, and I think the race is going to set up beautifully for him, and it looks like he's training great.
Anything, what kind of steam are you getting on the backstretch, Caton? You were out there 2:30. Yeah. And by the way, I mean, haven't you been with FanDuel TV? I know Larry was still calling races before he sort of became like a full-time guy there in a fixture on FanDuel TV on a regular basis at tracks around the country. But how come you're out there schlepping around in the morning while Larry gets to go in the afternoon?
I'm trying to figure that one out myself, Jeff. But I honestly, that it's my favorite time. So that's where in my element is getting a chance to see the horses back there. And I'd love to say there was one buzz horse, but that's not the case. I mean, there's a lot of talk and hype about journalism. I mean, the minute you see the horse, somebody said, you don't have to know anything about a horse to realize that that's a nice horse when you see him, because he has that kind of a presence and he's just so professional. But there are some other horses that have really trained well that I think might be under the radar. A horse like, I'm going to use Final Gambit, who's never run on the dirt. And Larry will like him because there are 3 gray horses in the field, but they are a little bit different as far as their markings. They're not identical grays, so that should help at least distinguish.
That's good.
Final Gambit's going to be out the back, that's for sure. I think the pace sets up for him, but you're going to get a great price on him because it doesn't seem like he's run as fast, but the reason he hasn't run as fast as some of the others is because he's been running on synthetic surfaces versus dirt. But his rider, Luan Machado, worked him and said to me that he thought he might be better on the dirt than he is even on the synthetic. And he's very good on the synthetic. So he had the fastest final quarter of any horse in the Derby this year in his race in winning the Jeff Ruby. So he's sort of my buzz horse. And then Sovereignty, this is now you handicap the trainers as much as you handicap the horses, and certain trainers have a certain demeanor, and Bill Mott has been not typically excited, positive, chatty, just very comfortable, confident about this horse all along, which to me is really tipping his hand about how he feels the horse is going to run. So that's the horse that I've been watching the most of, because having seen him, Larry and I both saw him in Florida, and he kind of had an up and a down, but at the same time, even in defeat in the Florida Derby, he actually ran a really pretty good race, and gives you reason to believe he could move forward off it.
Yeah, he didn't need to win the Florida Derby to get in, and it almost felt like that's how they were training him. Like we're training him to get him ready for the first Saturday in May, not for this race. And he ran great, but I agree. I think Sovereignty's coming into the race terrific. Final Gambit is very interesting. It kind of reminds me a little bit about the first Derby winner I ever called, Animal Kingdom, coming in synthetic and winning the Kentucky Derby. So he'll get the setup, I think, for sure, with the pace.
I think Mott has that same magic serum that you two guys have discovered, because it looks like he never ages. Doesn't he look the same as he did 35 years ago? You used to see him around Hialeah, and it's like, oh yeah, wow, that's Bill Mott. And
he really does. And now you can see him in it's duplicate, because his son Riley looks just like Bill.
Oh yeah.
And, so all the time you just kind of do a double take, especially having known Bill for.
I just wish I could find a way to keep my hair like he did. That part that hasn't worked.
There are all kinds of Fugazi formulas. I think Ron Popeil had something that proved not to be successful. All right, Caton, I know you've had a busy morning already and kind of been up all night, so we want to get your pick on the Derby, and then we'll continue with Larry here on Conversations. But specifically, I mean, as we speak now, I don't know, opinion probably subject to change, but how committed are you to any horses in particular in this year's Derby that have to be included?
I am absolutely including Sovereignty. Sovereignty is going to be my top pick. I have actually already gone on the record for FanDuel with that. And then I'm going to use Journalism, but I'm going to not use him to win. I'm going to use him underneath. I'm going to use Final Gambit. And then the horse that I'm probably going to throw in as a little price with underneath those horses is Grande. Not a lot of talk about him as much. I'm also going to use Larry's horse too, but I have a hunch he's going to get bet more than he probably should, because he's a great story with Brian Hernandez trying to win the Derby for 2 straight years. Ian Wilkes is just a really likable person. It's a team that you root for. They've been mainstays in Kentucky racing for a long time. So, but the horse is training well, and I do like him, so I'm using him as well. But top pick is going to be Sovereignty.
You don't know how frightened I just became, because I heard no mention of Sandman.
You
made an allusion to the Grays, but no mention of the.
I think he's going to be overbet.
I do too. I know he's going to be overbet.
Yeah.
There goes my money, and there goes the bunny, right?
Griffin Johnson being the reason.
You don't like him, huh? Neither of you like Sandman.
You know what? I don't dislike him, but I just felt like I didn't feel the field that he was running against is as good as some of the others. So.
He's got this young influencer, Griffin Johnson, owns a part of the horse, and he's got like 10 million, almost 10 million TikTok viewers. He's got 2 million Instagram followers. They're going to bet something on him, right? All those people.
Everybody
it seems as though he'll be overbet.
Metallica, right?
But he's got Vinny Viola in there, who seems to have a little bit of serendipity since he got into the horse game. What does he have? 2 Derby winners, Vinny Viola already in a short period of time. All right, Caton, get some sleep, and we'll see you on what time we're going to see you on FanDuel TV, and then we'll continue conversations here with the great Larry Collmus.
I will be on tomorrow afternoon for Wednesday at Churchill Downs, and then Thursday is our last morning show. So I'll be doing that, as well as working in the afternoon on Thurby, as they call it, and then throughout the day on Oaks Day and Derby Day for the undercard races.
All right, sounds great. Thank you so much for doing this. That's commitment, huh?
That's a cameo by Bandit.
Hello, Bandit.
Caton Bredar, ladies and gentlemen, with us here on Conversations. And let me see here. Can I? Okay, there we go. Larry now in focus. Rod Pederson is going to talk some pucks with us in about 10 minutes here on the show. And this guy was in the locker room last night, which had to be boiling over. That was a bloodbath between the Florida Panthers and the Tampa Bay Lightning last night. So we'll go right inside the locker room and inside the vast hockey knowledge of one Rod Pederson. That's coming up. But Larry, I guess the magic question would be, how the hell do you do it? 20 horses. If you dug deep into the microfiche files of races that were called at Tampa Bay Downs. I'm fascinated by ring announcers, stadium announcers, and of course track announcers. And I'm friends with many track announcers through the years, and have worked with many of them on a variety of different things. And I remember Richard Grunder was the longtime caller at Tampa Bay Downs, a real good guy. And I was doing one of the live, it was a replay show of horse racing. This is in a primitive era. Imagine it wasn't live. We used to put the races on, let's see the races type of thing, at 6:30 at night on a fledgling sports network here, which is now FanDuel TV.
Okay.
Known at the time as Sunshine Network. That was its origins, or one of its origins. There was also a sports channel that came along. And so Grunder, I'm covering the races, so we got to be friends. And he says, hey, you're an announcer. Why don't you try one? So literally, Larry, it was a 6-horse field.
Yeah.
I had all night to memorize the names, and having announced a zillion different things, been live on all kinds of variations of media presentations, I almost felt like I froze. It was
different.
Tough to not, keep. If the vernacular is not in your head, it's real tough. And then there's the identification factor, which isn't easy either when you're doing it live and looking at a race through binoculars. So the question would be, how the hell do you do a 20-horse field in the Derby?
I
mean, how does that work? What are the mechanics there, and how do you feel about it?
The preparation, for calling the Derby probably starts in November when you're watching the Breeders' Cup Juvenile and you're getting to know these horses that are going to be running in the Derby. And then a lot of it early on, really, Jeff, is to get these horses, just kind of know them, get to know them early, who might be there when it comes to May, watch all the prep races, watch the running styles of these horses. And then crunch time starts. And Churchill Downs will send me the cutouts of the jockey silks, which I should have, but they're in my bag. And I'll make flashcards. So I've got all 20 horses, 21 with Baeza still waiting, and just going through them and saying, okay, this is this horse, this is this horse, this is his post, this is his running style, this is his jockey, and just kind of keeping it in my head, all week long. And on a regular basis, you don't do that. It's just for the Kentucky Derby, because on a regular basis, you're just doing it race to race. You just want to get them in your head, and they call it a bathtub memory. Get them in your head, get rid of them, because in a half an hour, you got a new group. But with a Derby, it's different. You really want to know them like the back of your hand. And it's actually the memorization. Tom Durkin told me this. He says the memorization of the 20 horses is the easiest part. The hardest part, and he is totally right, and it's the reason he stopped calling the Kentucky Derby, is it drives you crazy. I mean, the pressure, the nerves, that's what you need to control, and it's not easy, believe me.
It seems like, you don't lose any sleep over these kind of assignments.
Oh, I do.
So what was it like the first time? Because we were, speaking earlier with Caton about how if you talk to anybody, from the guy that's opening up a bale of hay to the guy that's working on the racetrack, everybody's goal in the game is to be a part of a Kentucky Derby. So when that finally happened for you, what were the circumstances? I know Durkin was doing the calls, and I guess you directly replaced Tom Durkin on the NBC calls.
I did, and
that couldn't have been an easy thing to think about either. Although you do have sort of similar styles, there are some similarities there.
We'll talk about big shoes to fill. But Tom apparently said the situation with Tom had a lot of anxiety issues leading up to the Derby, which I do too, and I get. And he talked to his doctor, and his doctor says, let's stop. And nobody knew this, right? That this was going to happen, including me. One day I'm in the announcer's booth at Gulfstream in April, right? And phone rings, and I'll never forget the number that came up on the phone in the booth, 212-444-4444. I'm like, the heck is this? And it was the producer for the Triple Crown.
Sounds like a cab company.
Yeah, it was the same guy that Freddie Godelli, who did Sunday Night Football and also did the Kentucky Derby at the time as the producer. And he's like, "We want to talk to you about calling the Triple Crown for us." And first thing I thought is, what jerk friend of mine would play a prank on me like that, you know? And so anyway, they flew me to New York, did an interview with them, and then right after the interview, Dick Ebersol walks into the room, who was the boss of NBC Sports, the big guy.
Sure.
And he totally, like, I wasn't even there. He was like, "Oh, we will talk about the NFL schedule came out, blah, blah, blah." So he's leaving the room. He turns around, and I guess he was told about my apprehension on the phone. There was a real call. He goes, "Larry, do you believe us now?" So I thought that was great. And that night they called me. I had somebody pick me up at the airport. We went to a restaurant in Fort Lauderdale, some Mexican place. I forget what it was called. And as I'm walking into the bathroom to take care of, number one, phone rings, 212-444-4444. And it was Fred Gaudelli says, "We just want to welcome you to NBC Sports."
Wow, that's great. What year was that? That was
2011. And so that's the long way around your question. But the first call, then it was all of a sudden like, holy, you know what? I got to call this race. So, so the pressure was big, and I got through it. Animal Kingdom made his move, and I remember I said, "Here comes Animal Kingdom roaring down the center of the track," and the race was over, and I looked down at what then was the press box. Below me was like a balcony, and one of the first people I saw was Dick Girardi, who's a longtime writer for Philadelphia papers, and he was in the press box in Maryland when I called my first race as an 18-year-old announcer back in 1985. And I saw him, and I just started bawling. I'm like, wow. I just called the freaking Kentucky Derby,
wow.
And there's a guy that saw me call my first race, years and years before. It was like, holy mackerel, what a craziness.
Yeah, all right. Now, we've had Triple Crown winners emerge in the last decade and change, and many great stories of the derbies that you've had the pleasure to call. Which, if not all of them, but can you narrow down to a few? Which ones really stand out?
First one, obviously, because it's your first one. Orb, picking him up in the mud,
the 16 on the
outside, and hoping to God that it was really him. Because he was so covered.
It was hard to tell.
I went, "Orb!" and I'm like, "Oh God, please be him." And it was. So American Pharaoh, just because of what happened after and him winning the Triple Crown, and that would stand out. I mean, it's the Derby every year. It's Rich Strike, like what is going on? Who is this horse moving on the inside? It can't be Rich Strike, right?
Exactly.
But it was 80-1. One I'd like to forget a little bit was last year, because I picked up Mystic Dan too late in my, and like, damn it, I was like, you want to do a little bit better job, and hopefully this year it'll be better. But that move, you look for movers on the outside, and he slipped through on the inside. Great ride by Brian, but I was a little slow on the draw there, and hopefully this year will be better.
Seems like the quarter pole at the beginning of the stretch is like, in downtown Louisville somewhere.
Yeah, you hope that they're sort of separating by then, but last year they were not.
All right, we got some handicapping input from Caton, and you were a participant in that. I would imagine, and a very astute handicapper, if you're watching FanDuel TV and Larry puts on a pick 4 ticket, you might be advised to go ahead and invest a couple of bucks.
Better at Gulfstream than most places.
Doing a great job with that. It seems like every time I turn on the TV, they go, "Well, there he is. There's the man that hit for 4,470 yesterday." And who is it? It's always Larry Collmus. So. What would you narrow it down to if you were going to make a 4 or 5 horse trifecta box, which is my first immediate betting strategy, and of course you're going to throw in a couple of bombs and hope, like happened with Country House, that you end up prevailing even by the flukiest of disqualifications there, because it never happens in the Derby with maximum security. What would be the choices that you have in mind right now, and are they subject to change as we get closer to the race?
I said to a couple people last night, I said that I could see this actually being a journalism sovereignty Burnham Square try box. Those three to me are the ones. And I agree with Caton that Final Gambit could be any type of horse. He's never run on the dirt before. If he's better on the dirt, he's got a chance at a big price. I'm trying to think of. I don't really like the Japanese horses this year. I don't think they're as good as Forever Young was last year. I'm trying to think of anybody else that might come from the back and pick up pieces maybe to be a part of the superfecta. I would look for a Dead Closer or somebody like that for the super, but I think that the speed horses are, in a little bit of trouble this year, the way the race sets up. And I hope they don't go too fast, because then things get a little hairy late in the race. And I don't think we'll ever have a finish like we did last year with three noses on the wire, but you never know.
Oh, it was great drama. And of course, you brought it out, even if you picked them up late, you caught it. And nailed it as per usual. Always a great job on that. Larry, can't thank you enough for coming on the show.
Anytime.
It was a pleasure. And the voice of NBC, you'll be calling all three Triple Crown races. So
two of them. We don't have the Belmont anymore.
Oh, you don't have the Belmont anymore? What happened
Fox
there?
now. Yeah, they went to Fox a couple of years ago. So that's always the running joke when they introduced me on FanDuel, voice of 2/3 of the Triple Crown.
All right, I missed that story. I thought you were still involved.
We do the Breeders' Cup, though. We still have the Breeders' Cup.
And the Breeders' Cup as well. And you'll be down at Del Mar again, calling on a regular basis, correct?
Yeah, I can't wait for that. I mean, Del Mar is awesome. I mean, I did years at Saratoga. Now I get to do the other East Coast track. The other thing I found out, by the way, and this shocked me, apparently this year I'm going to pass Dave Johnson as the calling the most consecutive Kentucky Derbies for network television, which surprised me. This will be my 15th one, and he did 14 in a row. I think he did 17 overall, but there was one in the middle that he didn't. So that was pretty cool. I mean, I grew up listening to Dave, obviously, and Tom and all those guys, and it was like just to be mentioned in the same breath is amazing.
I knew Tom. I saw him emerge as one of the top guys in the country after a stint at Tampa Bay Downs. He was at Hialeah Park when I was doing some work there. And you could tell the guy was destined for greatness. And I had the pleasure of meeting Dave Johnson when I was covering racing out at Santa Anita back in the late 70s, early 80s. What a gentleman. And he had the 3-win jockey theory, that if a jockey had won 2 races on the card, bet him the rest of his rides.
Absolutely.
Until he won a third.
Yeah, that was a big Dave thing. Yeah, he was into that for sure.
Yeah, he was great. Now, will you do it in his honor as you surpass him in another milestone in your career and just belt out, and down the stretch they come?
Not a chance in the world, because, first of all, he has that patented, right? You're not allowed to.
Although Miramani does a tremendous impression.
And I'm sure, Frank and I, by the way, Frank will tell you, we've been doing impressions together for years, but we actually called a race at the Great Barrington Fair together, like both as Trevor Denman, and it was hysterical. But Dave doesn't want you to do that, and I don't blame him. I mean, that's his thing, and I think it's silly to try to sound like him. But that line is legendary.
He was brilliant. Yeah,
3 of them across the track, and down the stretch they come.
I think you ought to, think about working it in as a tribute. Larry, a pleasure having you on the show. Thanks so much for joining us here on this week's edition of Conversations. Really great having you on. Hope to do it again.
Anytime. My pleasure. Have a great day.
All right. That was Larry Collmus, ladies and gentlemen. Now, shoot the puck. Shoot the puck, Kozlov. This guy is as impressive as anybody I've ever met when it comes to insight into the game of professional hockey. Let me see if we can get this working here. And bring on to the program Rod Pederson, who was in the locker room last night with the Florida Panthers. And let me click in here, Rod. There you go. All right, there he is, the handsome one himself. Took a couple of tries. Rod, does a great podcast. How many shows are you on? Because I had the pleasure of meeting you when you were at the Podcast Junkies there in Boca. And you were doing your great show, Cats and Bolts, which... could it be any more appropriate for today's conversation? But then I see you on virtually everything. I mean, you're talking to soccer guys, you're talking to race car drivers, you're dinner with Scotty Bowman. I don't know anybody that's more connected, period, with the country of Canada. And then beyond that, in the sport of hockey. Rod, thanks so much for joining us on the show.
Defo, you're far too kind, number one. Number two, I see why you're so beloved by the South Florida market. I see it, or the Florida market in general, man. And you're very, very, very talented. And number three, with a name like yours, is it French at all? And do you have a Canadian connection? Because you love my NHL stuff. You seem to like my CFL stuff. You must have a connection to the Great White North.
You know what? I was a big fan of the six-team league. I grew up, there were only six teams, of course, in the NHL, the original six. And we used to get a Ranger game every other Saturday on, I believe it was WOR in New York. They would play the Knicks one week and the Rangers the next. And that was when the Rangers had the Gump and Harry Howell, Roger the Chief, Nielsen. And they weren't great. But because they weren't very good, and there were only six teams, and I wanted to be a little bit more of a front runner, I fell in love with the Montreal Canadiens, of course, Les Habitants, and they were easy to root for because they won like every Stanley Cup every year. And so I really got immersed in hockey. Then I kind of fell out of being a hockey fan for a while after the six-team expansion because I just was in different circumstances. And I've come back, of course, like everybody, to fall in love with it again. Because is there anything? We talk about this; it's almost cliche, but I do believe this to be true. That and a lot of sportscasters don't follow hockey very closely. I won't say that I'm immersed in the regular season to the extent clearly that you are. But once they get around to the postseason, it seems clear cut. This is the toughest team championship that you could possibly endeavor to win. And look what we're seeing through four games of even just this Panther and Lightning series.
Yeah, they say the Stanley Cup is the toughest trophy to win. I think they're all. I think they're all tough to win in
No doubt.
every sport, right?
Yeah.
But this series here, listen, I don't know how deep you want to go, but
As deep as we can. We're
well, there's a
going
lot
all
of
in.
hockey people that are complaining about the playoff format. They don't like it. And I want to get into the details, but I like it because this is the fourth Battle of Florida in 5 years because of this current alignment. It's perfect for the sport of Florida. And by the way, or the state of Florida and the sport of hockey. I love yours and my conversations off mic about your history with sports in this market, man, and how it grew. And you were at all the news conferences when the Panthers were announced.
Yeah.
Did you think that it would take this long, 30 years, to get to finally a rivalry where the teams don't like each other?
It's weird, right? We talk about it sometimes on some of our other shows here on Bleacher Brothers, and that is there are really no intense professional sports rivalries in the state. If the Dolphins play the Buccaneers or the Jaguars, nobody really cares. It's just another team. Yeah, seriously. The Heat in Orlando briefly had a little bit of a thing going on, but I don't know. You could probably buy those tickets off a scalper for $10 outside, 2 minutes to game time, and nobody cares about that one. Well, when you go to baseball, the Rays are in another league altogether, and the Marlins have been so downtrodden that they barely have any fans that still cling to any glimmer of hope that they'll ever be good one day, and a rivalry with anybody would exist. And then these two teams, they hate each other. I was actually at the groundbreaking ceremony for the Tampa Bay Lightning when they announced the franchise, and they were putting shovels in the ground for what was going to be. What was it? The Blunder Dome? What was the nickname of the arena?
Thunderdome.
Yeah, right. So anyway, and I'll never forget this because Phil Esposito was representing the ownership group at the time for the expansion Tampa Bay Lightning, who came in a couple of years after the Panthers.
Yeah.
So and the big question was, is there Japanese money involved, Phil? Is there Japanese money involved? And Phil kept a total denial, and the league executives, no Japanese money whatsoever. So then they put the shovel in the ground to make it all official, and then they whisk us away to have sushi with like 20 Japanese billionaires who were investing in the franchise. So you thought, I don't know, is this going to emerge as some big rivalry with the two teams? The Panthers went to the Stanley Cup final in their third year. But for some reason, there's bad blood there. You were in the locker room last night. I mean, look what's happened just with Hagel in this series.
Well, so the reason, obviously, why there hasn't been a rivalry till now is they hadn't met until 5 years ago. So now they're meeting every year, and it's hockey, and it's playoffs. It's not regular season love taps, right? Like, it's dirty.
Yeah.
And it started over there in Tampa Thursday night, and I was there in game 2. Alexander Barkov, the Panthers captain, gets hit dirty. Suspension comes out of it for Tampa's Brandon Hagel. We come back here Saturday for game 3. Matthew Tkachuk, who's now, I think you would agree, the face of the Panthers. He has to be, right? He does the exact same thing and escapes with no suspension. So the Lightning are furious about that. And then game 4 last night, sold out American Bank Arena. Lightning are up 2-1 in the third. Looks like they're going to win it and go home on a 2-2 tie. And all of a sudden, Aaron Ekblad, just coming off a suspension of his own, works over. I don't know if you saw the hit.
Yes.
It was like a pro wrestling move, like with the referees with their backs
Forearm
turned.
shiver. That's exactly the way I described it. It looked like something you would see from Hulk Hogan. To some helpless guy that was laying at the other turnbuckle that was part of a tag team that he couldn't get his partner in the ring.
But this is real. So after the game, you mentioned being in the locker room. The Panthers are laughing about this. And that's another topic. John Cooper, you literally could see steam coming off his head. He was so mad. And he was asked about that specific hit. And he's like, it's getting tiring talking about hits after every game. And he turned to the reporter, by the way, that asked it. And he goes, what do you think? And I'll give the reporter credit. He goes, nobody cares what I think. And he's right.
Sure.
But John didn't want to talk about it. He didn't want to talk about it. So you would think, I've covered a lot of series, as have you, going back there for Amalie Arena Wednesday night, that this thing's over. And with most teams, it probably would be. But these are still the Tampa Bay Lightning. And they got some dudes, and they got a lot of pride. And I still think they'll be angry from what happened last night. So this series has turned very nasty.
Yeah, you had the great rivalry, bad blood between the two teams. As you said, familiarity breeds contempt, and seems to have ignited that with them playing so often in the postseason. You mentioned Cooper, who everybody seems to like a lot, and he seems like a very distinguished gentleman. I don't know that I've ever seen him more demonstrative or outraged, or as exhilarated as he was when they got those 2 goals and took the lead, because it seemed like an immense amount of pressure was released. Game 4, when it's 2-1 either way, is clearly pivotal. I mean, you could call it that. And as you mentioned, that they're going back now down 3-1, having to win the next 3 games against this Florida Panther team, which won't be easy, as opposed to 2-2 with all the momentum and erasing the bitterness of losing those 2 games at home to start the series. Where, once again, I mean, Bobrovsky has to be a nightmare for these guys. They have to see him in their dreams, because when he was with Columbus, he knocked them out after they had, won the President's Trophy that year. So he's been a particular nemesis for them. But the coaching matchup is interesting. Cooper, like I said, it seemed like everybody always liked it. He had respect. He had won a couple of Stanley Cups there, and very distinguished guy, seems to be very humble. I didn't realize that Paul Maurice was the character that he is. You know him well, but we had dubbed him as the French Joe Philbin, who was the former coach of the Miami Dolphins, because it seemed like he had like zero personality when he first was behind the bench there. And you're asking yourself, why did they hire like the losingest coach in NHL history to come in and take over and do a job here? And it couldn't have turned. I couldn't have been more wrong. That this guy is a walking riot, and just as outspoken and pleasant. We didn't realize the Joe Pesci stuff would come into play so much, where every other word is an expletive in certain circumstances. But it's an insanely interesting coaching matchup between these two guys. How much of a factor is that in these games?
Oh, well, it's huge. And this year, every year, you're familiar with the website, The Athletic, the pay for subscription website. They do a poll of the players. And one of the questions this year was, who's the coach in the NHL? They asked the players you would want to play for the most. John Cooper finished 1, Paul Maurice 2.
Wow.
So that tells you the 2 most respected coaches by the players. Okay. So, but I remember this, Defo, and you can attest to this. I'm from Canada. I've been here 4 years. Okay. I married an American. When they hired Paul Maurice, my friends here, especially guys around the gym, they're like, exactly like you. Why would we hire this guy? He's never won anything. I'm like, well,
no Stanley Cups, nothing.
Right. Is that an American thing? Because I knew him from Winnipeg, where he was for 9 years. I was next door in Saskatchewan. So we were basically neighbors. And I just knew that he'd had great success, regular season, and not bad playoff success in other stops in Toronto, Carolina, Winnipeg. Career guy. Was hired as the 2nd youngest coach in NHL history at the age of 25. We just thought of him as a winner. Yeah. But then you guys look at it and go, well, he's never won anything. And we're like, wait a minute. No, he hasn't. But he's still a great coach. And when he got here, he was very humble, very polite, very yes, sir, no, sir. But the more they started to win, you started to see the language come out. That's the hockey thing, right? I was a little surprised at the parade last year on the Fort Lauderdale beach. was like,
Oh,
kids.
he was beside him. He must have had too many Labatt's. I don't know what he was consuming. It
When
might have
should that show
stronger
you
than that.
who? It shows you win. You can do whatever you want.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I
Basically.
mean, he probably endeared himself to even more people by coming across that way here in South Florida than he did when he was this distinguished gentleman who didn't have much to say and seemed to be overly humble in spite of his record for a number of losses. He was a winner, though, as you pointed out. All right, so that series now goes back 3-1. In all likelihood, the Panthers prevailed there. That would be three straight years that they eliminated the Tampa Bay Lightning. So you start to think of cliches like, well, maybe they have our number. How would that set up if they do prevail? In your opinion, Rod Pederson, the Panthers to possibly work their way back? They're going to be a tough out. The odds makers obviously saw that. They were, I think, the second choice behind Dallas to win the Stanley Cup. And interestingly, you had a situation where both of those favorites could have been in jeopardy had they not prevailed in their games last night.
Oh yeah.
Do you see them going back to the Stanley Cup Finals and having a chance to defend their championship?
That's my pick for the Stanley Cup Final is Florida Dallas.
All right.
But it's just narrow. It's funny because I put it on my Facebook account and somebody wrote in before the playoffs. I said Florida Dallas, book it. And some guy goes, thanks. Now I know what not to bet because I don't have the best record, right? And I don't bet. I throw out these predictions and stuff and everything, but that's just it's that narrow. It's not like football. And just so anybody knows, I've spent a career calling football games and hockey games. Sometimes in football, you win that first round game and it gets easier from there. Hockey is not like that. It gets harder and harder and harder and harder, right? The first round is difficult to get by, but you're facing tougher opponents every round, right? So, and we've seen that with the Panthers the last couple of years. But when you say, how does it play out? Because I think I had the Panthers in 7. If they win it in 5, I'll take that. But the thing is, I don't know how much, it sounds like you spent a lot of time in Tampa. Like you go over there, Defoe, that's a hockey town. You see Panthers
there are
banners.
good sports fans there. There are
Right.
not as many of them as we have here, but I would say from the standpoint of emotional investment in their teams, in some cases, it's even stronger.
Right. But what I'm saying is I think the Panthers aspire to make this a hockey town like Tampa is.
Yeah.
Right. With the banners on the light post downtown and all that. I don't know if that would ever happen. I don't know. I'm new here compared to you. Right. But that's what they want to do is make this a hockey town. And so it's a nice goal to aspire to.
I know there were some nervous people, including Bobby Clark and Bill Torrey, when they had the sort of initiation ceremonies there that they had achieved the franchise. And it was at Bert and Jack's, a restaurant that no longer exists. It was a very popular place, but they had to wonder if this was going to fly at all. And then the original team that they put together, going back to their expansion season, what was one of those clubs that just what was easy to embrace. And then when they made their way into the Stanley Cup Finals, of course, with the Beezer standing on his head and then lost that series to Colorado, it sort of put them on the map. The years of being mired in mediocrity, that'll kill it for a city that's not oriented towards supporting any team that isn't a championship caliber club. But certainly the last few years, and a lot of this, I did want to mention this gentleman because we're speculating he may be the sharpest executive in all of sports, and that is Bill Zito. And the moves that this guy has made, and they're bold moves also. It isn't like this guy is making trades that you go, yeah, okay, we needed a defenseman. I mean, he's going out there and discombobulating entire concepts about the team and trading Huberdeau for the Kachuk deal and so many other maneuvers he's made. He always seems to be right on the money. No matter who he loses, he always manages to bring somebody in that picks up the slack. A remarkable run by a team executive who was new in the position and followed in the footsteps of a guy that probably was legend in Canada as well as being around the league, was Dale Talon, who wasn't able to put this together.
No, I want to, you obviously know Dale. I want to give him as much credit as possible. I say he's put the bones of this together. Drafted Barkov, drafted Ekblad, signed Bobrovsky, drafted Huberdeau, who they traded for Kachuk. But it's funny, I was on the radio in Calgary this morning and the host said, do you recall a trade in sports history that gave a makeover of a franchise like Kachuk? Not just hockey, any sport, Defoe.
Wow.
Yeah, and I'm like, no, I don't. And that's the team that gave him away, Calgary.
Wow.
Right?
Yeah.
So, and the thing with Zito is it's a tough racket to get credit for. You know, people could say he's lucky. No, he's had too many lucky instances.
Yes.
Right? He's too thorough in what he does. From what I understand, he talks to everybody. He has the use of analytics, but the use of his heart and his brain, right? He has surrounded himself with people that I know very well from decades in hockey as advisors. You know, so he's not the sharpest guy in the room. Zito would tell you, although I've never heard this quote from him, but his philosophy seems to be, if you're the smartest guy in the room, you're in the wrong room. Do you know what I mean? Like, he's not afraid to pick the brains of guys that have won Stanley Cups before and built successful franchises. So the Panthers are very lucky to have him. And from what it sounds like to me, he plans to be here for a long time.
Yeah, and he's not distant from, and maybe this is more true of the NHL than it is in other sports, where there's not necessarily a disconnect, but the coach or the manager is sort of subservient to the general manager in decision making. And apparently, according to Maurice and I guess Zito as well, these guys talk all the time. It goes back and forth, and they're very much in conjunction with each other on a lot of decisions that are made. All right, let's look at some of the other possibilities. Winnipeg was the best team in the league all year long. They started out red hot. They tailed off just a little bit and then caught fire again. I don't know much about Winnipeg. You rarely see Winnipeg games. I've seen a little bit of them in the finals, but they find themselves, in a dead heat, right? Right now in their series. So what do you mean? Why were they being dismissed, the Winnipeg Jets, in spite of the fact?
Because they've never won.
Okay.
I'll tell you right now. I'll tell you what. They're the Buffalo Bills of the National Hockey League. Okay, and they never even actually got to the Stanley Cup final, ever. So why they've been dismissed? They won the President's Trophy for the first time in franchise history this year. They are all world. They are built to win.
Is that a curse, though, to win the President's Trophy in terms of the Cup?
Statistically, yes. And okay. I brought that up on my show, and the Winnipeg people lost their minds. They're like, what do you mean? And I'm like, well, look, nobody since 2013 has won the President's Trophy and gone on to win the Stanley Cup. So what would you call it?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I think it is a curse. But more than that, Connor Hellebuyck. You've heard that name. Their starting goalie has been pulled from the last two games. And yet he's won like the last two Vezina trophies for the top goalie in the NHL. So once they get to the playoffs, he folds. And I don't like saying it, but that's what it is, Defo. We've seen players like that. And the Four Nations face-off, which we haven't talked about here today, but the Gary Bettman dreamt up hockey tournament in February of the four countries pitted USA versus Canada in the gold medal final. Connor Hellebuyck for the USA versus Jordan Binnington of Canada. Those two goalies are facing each other in this series. Binnington's with the Blues, Hellebuck's with the Jets. And Binnington's coming out on top there. So you're asking me what's going on? Hellebuyck, they've turned in, Cinderella's pumpkin turned into a glass slipper or whatever you want to say. The playoffs started.
Yeah.
Right? And that's their kryptonite.
Yeah. Winnipeg looked good, though, first couple of games. St. Louis has bounced back now.
Well, they had him. They had him.
Too. Yeah.
I watched the games. They had him in their hand, and they let him wiggle off the hook.
Well, we see a lot of this. I mean, some of the drama that's taken place. If you look at that game 4 in the Edmonton series against the LA Kings, the Kings win the first couple of games. Looks like they have command of the series. They go back to Edmonton, lose one, and then they're up 3-2 with a minute and change or so to go in a game. Bouchard knocks one home from, it was like Bobby Hull took the shot from the red line, and it flutters its way in there in some kind of knuckleball fashion. And then you could see they were putting relentless pressure on the Kings in the overtime period, and you thought it was only a matter of time before they cracked through and get the goal. And then Draisaitl knocks that one home, and so that series goes to 2-2. Any feeling there about the Kings? And they play again tonight. Every game is pivotal in the postseason, but certainly a game 5 would represent that concept to an extreme. What do you think? And what did you see there? Because Edmonton had to be very thirsty to try and come back and win a Stanley Cup. They thought they were denied after that remarkable comeback last year to take it to a 7th game.
I love that comment from the viewer, Andrew, who says hockey playoffs should be 80 games and the regular season should be 20. Shouldn't every league be like that? But last night I was sitting with a reporter from Tampa Bay, and he brought up that Oilers-Kings series. He's like, how wild is that? He's like, every game's got a minimum of 8 goals. It's literally something the NHL probably loves, the unpredictability of all of it. You would think the Oilers are like the most aggrieved fan base ever. And by the way, I'm married to one. Serena, you've met her. She's a huge, the biggest Oilers fan I know.
Yeah.
And they act like they're so hard done by. I'm like, you've won 5 Stanley Cups. I'd say, chill out. Yet they're just so hard done by all the time. And when they fell down 0-2 to the Kings, they all thought it was over, even their own fans. But one of the stories in these playoffs, Defo, and I appreciate the fact that you're watching all the games and you're so in tune to it, is the home teams this year that have to run the math after last night, but the home teams are like 20-6.
I saw 22-10.
Is that what it is?
Second game last night. Yeah.
So the last 2 seasons, the road teams won more. But
Right.
this year, it's the home by a large margin. The home teams are winning at home. I don't know how long that'll continue, but it's a pretty interesting story in these playoffs. And based on that, LA will probably win tonight.
Well, of course, that's because we perpetuated the theory that home ice didn't mean much in the NHL playoffs
That's
before they got
right.
started. So, of course, they're dominating. I mean, proving that we're not exactly Don Cherry or Doc Emmerich here when we're talking about sport. Everybody becomes, I mean, you must love this, Rod, because everybody becomes a hockey expert around the time of the playoffs. Even guys that haven't watched a game, haven't seen the puck drop all season long, and all of a sudden everybody's screaming about strategies and things like that. So that's kind of a cool part of an aspect of the postseason as well, is you have so many more people.
I don't know if it's a Florida thing or a U.S. thing, but you're exactly right. They're all experts now. And I was actually on a podcast the other night, and he said about John Cooper being out coached in the Four Nations face-off by Mike Sullivan. And I said, just stop. And I'm seeing this now from Tampa fans saying John Cooper's being out coached. I'm like, how do you even know? And I'll be honest, in the playoffs, I think the players decided. This ain't football. Where you got coordinators calling plays and game plans and stuff. This is the players are deciding it. So to say anybody's being out coached is insulting, frankly, in my opinion.
All right. We haven't touched on the Toronto Maple Leafs. Starved. I mean, they haven't won a championship since Andy Bathgate was skating there, I believe. And the long-term futility defies the level of interest. I mean, you would have. Is it fair to say Toronto is Canada's premier franchise, at least?
They'll tell you that. They'll tell you that. I think Montreal's actually usurped them. Depends on what your
because they haven't been good for a while. I mean, since that run with Jacques Martin, where they went from like an 8th seed, I think they got to the conference finals that year
in the 70s. Do you see why I thought you were Canadian? DeForrest sounds French. You're speaking French or French accent.
Yes.
So I think based on franchise values, Montreal just usurped Toronto. But no, I'm serious.
I was a big Yvon Cournoyer fan. I loved Cournoyer.
The Roadrunner.
Yeah.
Well, you know what's also great is, Defo, is the Florida fans have literally told me, they're like, don't talk about anything NHL related prior to the Panthers, because as far as we're concerned, it didn't happen. I'm like, no, I'm going to talk about it because there was a league before you were. It's like kids thinking nothing ever happened till they were born. There was a world till you came along, before you came along. You know what I mean?
Well, they always talked about expansion diluting the talent, but while there's enough talent, I think, to supply all of these teams with star caliber players, and I'm always amazed at the skill level of these guys in an abstract game that's hard to really. I mean, you see a quarterback drop back, he throws a pass, you can see the blocking, you can see the pass pattern that was run, you can see the defense. It's not as clear cut watching hockey, but then when you start to sort of dissect it a little bit, and you watch the passing and the execution and the breakouts and the way they orchestrate these power plays and defend them, it's amazing. The skill level that you see. And I'm glad that ends up being illustrated to the average fan who maybe isn't watching as much hockey, because you really can't miss it. And then you factor in that it's an absolute free-for-all from a physical standpoint. Do you find this, though, that this is what's unusual, too, about this Tampa series in particular? Not to dwell on that overwhelmingly so, but the physicality in it, do they not normally try to clean things up a little bit in the postseason? Teams don't want to take stupid penalties and have guys for a period of times in the box.
Fighting is almost non-existent in the playoffs. Even going back to the 70s and 80s, even when it happened, it was a novelty because, other than the Broad Street Bullies, Philly, 73, 74. But since then, there's not a lot of fighting in the playoffs, and a lot of folks thought that there was going to be fights last night. I'm like, no, they don't do that in the playoffs. But on your Leafs thing, I have it as the most intriguing series of the 8 because of the Battle of Ontario, Toronto, Ottawa, right? And they've met 4 times before this year, and the Leafs had won them all, and they could finish it off tonight. Same thing. So I just want to circle back on your question on that. I don't know why the Leafs have as many fans as they do, because they haven't won since the invention of the color television. I don't get it. There's so many young fans love them. Why do you love them? They've never won, other than they're on, primetime national television every Saturday night. That's got to be what it is. Can you imagine if the one team was on Monday Night Football every week?
Yeah.
It's kind of what the Leafs have enjoyed. And I think that's why they have so many fans.
Yeah, definitely held, on a different sort of pedestal, it seems like, in terms of sports franchises in Canada. All right, so you're picking the Panthers to win it all. What do you think will be the best story that emerges out of the postseason, save for the Panthers possibly repeating? Other than that, what really strike? What are we watching, Rod Pederson?
If the Panthers don't repeat, the biggest one's probably the Canadian drought, and they call it the Bettman curse. No Canadian team has won the Stanley Cup since 1993.
Wow.
And that coincides with Gary Bettman's tenure. So I'm sure you're aware in Canada, they hate Gary Bettman because they think he's conspired.
I think they hate him universally.
Well, especially Canada.
Yeah.
So that would be the biggest story. If there's some Canadian team, and to be honest, they're looking, Montreal's faltering now. I think the Leafs have the best shot. Oilers and Jets are 2-2 in their series, so who knows? That would be the next biggest story, is the Canadian drought. And the President's Trophy curse, does it continue for Winnipeg? And will there be some hero in these playoffs? Right now, there hasn't been, but over the years, there's been guys that have elevated their game and become a hero that we didn't even heard of before. So far, that hasn't happened, but that's something we always watch for.
The one goalie you would want if you were putting a team together, that's like
Bob. Right now, Bob. I think he's going to play 4 or 5 more years. Like, look at Crosby's almost 40. Ovechkin's almost 40. Tom Brady played to 45. So it used to be goalies would get to their late 30s and shut it down, unless they were Johnny Bauer. Marty Brodeur played to his 40s, but now a lot of them are. So my point is, I think Bob's going to be around for 4 or 5 more years. And to me, he's the best money game goalie. I had a big argument with the Thunder. Well, it's called We the Thunder podcast before the series. Vasilevsky or Bob.
Yeah.
And I took Bob. And how's it look now?
Right. Looking like he's the right choice. I mean, he stood on his head there in game number 2, kept him in it all the way, a 1-0 nail biter until the very end with an empty netter. And then last night, after those 2 quick goals, unprecedented, I would imagine, Rod, you would know this better than I would. Unprecedented, 2 teams scoring goals. 11 seconds.
Never happened.
Same game. That couldn't possibly have happened before, even in the days of the Gump. So that was kind of wild, and it made for an extremely entertaining game, and what's been the predicted bloodbath of a series. All right, where can we catch? Cats and Bolts, I would imagine, is rocking right now with the series on.
Business is good.
Yeah. Where can we catch some of your programs?
Thank you, man. Cats and Bolts is on YouTube. It's all one word. Cats and Bolts, all one word. Look it up on YouTube. And the Rod Pederson Show airs daily on the Game Plus television network all across Canada and 32 U.S. states. So that's why it's a lot broader than just Panthers Lightning. And that's where you see all my guests from a wide variety of sports. But you get it, man. You do the exact same thing. You've had a great career. I'm kind of trying to follow your lead, Defo.
You're distinguishing yourself more than capably on your own. I mean, anybody that's having dinner with Scotty Bowman, I got to give a thumbs up. I said, there's my hockey guy for this week.
That was
lucky. A pleasure, man, having you on the show. It's always great to talk with you about sports, and especially the NHL. And can't thank you enough for joining us on this week's.
Keep in touch, my friend. Great job.
All right. Rod Pederson, ladies and gentlemen. So a lot of fun today. I hope you guys got something out of that. Caton Bredar, always brilliant, performed here under very difficult circumstances after having to pull a virtual all-nighter and being on the backstretch of Churchill Downs. We got her opinion about some of the horses going to the gate in the Derby. Larry Collmus will be calling the Derby for NBC television. So a very exciting prop coming up for him. And as he said, a nerve-wracking experience as well. Who would know this guy got nervous? When you hear the call, you would never think so. And Rod Pederson, just brilliant on hockey, was in the locker room. He could feel the heat. which wasn't being generated by the Miami Heat. There was a stench hovering over the Kaseya Center, but Florida Panthers last night coming through in style in defense of their Stanley Cup and opening up a 3-1 gap on the Tampa Bay Lightning and putting their proverbial backs against the wall. All right, thanks everybody for tuning in. We'll see you next week. Have some special things cooking here on future editions of Conversations. For all of our guests on the show today, I want to thank you for joining us. People at Bleacher Brothers, always great to be performing here. See you tomorrow morning at 8 o'clock with the Defo Show. I'm Jeff DeForrest, and we'll see you next time, the next edition of Conversations.